نسلم على رسول الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First and foremost, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the Khatam al-Qur'an and the dhikr that we have just recited in honor of all of our deceased parents, forefathers and foremothers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma aghfir lahum warhamhum wa sakkinhum fil jannah. Oh Allah, we ask you to have mercy on their souls and to pardon and to forgive them and to grant them a high place in our Jannah to Firdaus. We are here to celebrate the anniversary of this masjid, 170 years. And our hearts are filled with shukr, with gratitude that for 170 years the Claremont Main Road Masjid has nurtured the spiritual growth of generations of Muslims. It provided a sanctuary for the ruh, for nourishment of the soul, and a sacred space for worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbul Rahmah wal Maghfirah, the Lord of compassion and forgiveness. As I said earlier, we are here to show our gratitude, a thanksgiving service. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith has recorded, "Man la yashkuru nas, la yashkuru Allah." Whoever is not thankful to other human beings can never be thankful to Allah. A very significant hadith. That if you cannot show gratitude to human beings, then Allah says you can never truly be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in fact, the way to Allah is through good relations with others. And so we are here to show our gratitude for this masjid and its congregation. First and foremost, I want to say shukran wa jazakumullah khairan to Imam Farid Galant, Imam Uthman Galant, Imam Shamil Galant, and all of those of the Al-Amien Dhikr Jama'ah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, inshallah. What a beautiful dhikr that you have read. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you strength and good health to continue this good work that you are doing. It was such, there was no choice when we wanted to invite a Dhikr Jama'ah. It had to be the Al-Amien Dhikr Jama'ah. Because as you know, most of you are from Claremont. Most of you grew up in this masjid. Most of you knew the elders who patronized this masjid and have now gone from this life into the year after. And so I am sure many of our ancestors from Claremont, they are alive, their arwah is with us. They are smiling and they are very happy that we have invited you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the dhikr, inshallah. To speak a little bit more about the history of this masjid and this area, we have two short speakers. We have firstly a young budding historian that I'd like to introduce to you. You know, we know the great historian of the past, Dr. Ahmad Davids, al-Marhoom, may Allah have mercy on him and grant him a Jannah, inshallah. This young scholar, a very young man, I think, in my humble estimation, is going to make that kind of contribution. His name is Abdud-Daiyaan Petersen. Abdud-Daiyaan is a student at the University of Cape Town, an honor student, previously based at the Environmental and Geographical Sciences in the Department of UCT. And he has a long CV, but I'm not going to tell you anything about that CV. The most important part of Abdud-Dayyaan's CV, which he didn't give to me, that he is a grandson of another great elder in our community, but not from Claremont, Imam Amin Basadin, al-Marhoom, rahimahullah, from the Nurul Islam Masjid. And it is very coincidental that we invited Abdud-Daiyaan. I invited him because he is a historian. But when this masjid was established by Salamuddin Daris, he made the Imam of the Nurul Islam Masjid in Baitan Khrah Street, who was the great Imam Abdul Rauf, who was the youngest son of Tuan Guru. He made the Imam of that masjid the trustee of the Claremont Main Road Masjid. Imam Abdul Rauf then came, left the Nurul Islam Masjid, came to the Claremont Main Road Masjid, and of course we know generations of his sons and their sons of the Abdul Rauf then were imams. And then when there was a court case, they looked at the title deed, and it said that the Imam of the Buitengracht Street Masjid should be the trustee of the Claremont Main Road Masjid. And the judge asked, who is this Imam? And of course it was Imam Amir Basadi al-Marhum. And the Imam was shocked. He said, but I don't want to be the trustee. And that is how they established a board of governors through a judgment of the Cape Town High Court at the time in 1978. So I would like to invite Abdud-Daiyaan to speak to us a little bit about the history of this particular area, Claremont and Newlands. Shukran.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. I just want to add on to Imam Rashid's introduction about my great-grandfather, Imam Al-Amien Dhikr. He was actually born in Claremont in the 1890s, and he grew up in Claremont itself. And so it was coincidental that when he was made Imam as a Khatib previously of the old Imam Ismail Khanif Edwards, when he became Imam and he found out he was trustee, it was even more of a shock because he grew up in this community and he was born in this community. But enough about my family and Al-Amien. I was asked to give a very brief 15 minutes, I might have to cut it even shorter now, on the history of Newlands and Claremont, and particularly in terms of the Muslim history of the area. And I had cut it into 3 different segments of Muslim history in this area. The first is the segment of introduction. How was Islam first introduced into the area? The second is the clandestine. How was Islam practiced secretly in the area because of the situation? And then thirdly, formalization. How was Islam formalized in this area to create this community, of the Claremont Muslim community? So the foundation of this area, the broader Claremont Newlands area, goes back to the pre-colonial period during the time of the Khoi. Before Jan van Riebeeck came in 1652, this entire area, the entirety of the Cape Flats was inhabited by the local indigenous Khoi, and their cattle trails actually ran along what is now Main Road, so literally along this road over here. And one of the main krale of the Khoi at the time, when the Dutch came here, they called it the Ronde Doornbos, which is the round thorn bush, and that is where the name Rondebosch came from, because the Khoi were based there at the time. And so, because the Liesbeek River also flowed, in this area, it was a very fertile land, and the Dutch realized that it would be one of the best places to actually start, a number of plantations, farms, and so on. And so this is when we see, many of these different farms going up. So Protea, which is now Bishop's Court, the vineyard, there was another one up further into the mountain called the Paradise Park. There were, many all along, Grooteskuur as well, and then one of the most important in this side was the Newlands at Nieuweland or Papenboom at the time. And when they came there, to set up these farms, it was also, at a distance enough from the city that they placed many of the political exiles from Indonesia on these farms. Because placing them this far means they didn't have influence on the slaves that were living in Buka, in the city, in town at the time. And so the first introduction of Islam to this part of Cape Town, of the peninsula, was the placement of these Muslims on many of these farms. And one of the earliest of these exiles that I could find was a massive lot, 30 Makassarese exiles from Makassar, were placed in 1680 on Rustenburg farm. And it seems, quite disconnected at the time, but it's important to note that, the main road, ensured that many of these different farms flowed into each other, and, there was a lot of movement even that far back. And, in the 1600s and early 1700s, we see many more of these political exiles coming. One of the most prominent was the Raja of Tambora, Abdul Basir, who was actually the son-in-law, although disputed, but the son-in-law of Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar. So we can see that connection over there in around 1697. And there's records that state that that very same Raja of Tambora was one of the first people to actually transcribe the Quran from memory in South Africa in the 1690s. And one of the later exiles that came, that was also put on newlands and spread amongst here, were a lot of around 24 mixed Chinese and Malay exiles called Peranakan, and the chief of them was an individual by the name of Dipanagara, and he was the son of one of the sultans on Java. And they were quite prominent Muslims at the time, and this was in 1724. So we can see, in that period of the late 1600s into the 1700s, the introduction of Islam through many of these, many of them were actually well-learned Islamic scholars as well. And that then brings us into the second period, which is the clandestine. Now, under Dutch rule, the Dutch East India Company, there was a placard or a law that stated that no religion may be tolerated in their colonies other than the Dutch Reformed Church. And so naturally, they were not allowed to practice Islam at the Cape. And so what happened was many of these Muslims, they went underground, they went, into their lodges and into the quiet places, into the fields. And it's in these fields that they would perform the khadats, and they would perform the dhikrs and the mawlud. And so this mawlud, part of the mawlud section that we did today, I'm sure most of the Jama'ah know that it's from the Mawlud Sharaful Anam. I'm not sure how many are aware of that. And this specific Sharaful Anam, not the riwayats, the Sharaful Anam was introduced to the Cape specifically in the Lagos from those very people that were brought from Southeast Asia. And so they would be practicing these mawlud, in the fields, in the little pandokis and so on, that they would do secretly in the countryside at the time. And this period of the clandestine continued up until the early 1800s, where in reality there's almost no record of Muslims living in this part of the city. The only record that we have of Muslims is mostly in Buka and in town itself. And after that period of the clandestine, we see that that law of only Islam being practiced was lifted in the early 1800s. Those placards, the statutes of India were lifted, and Islam was allowed to be practiced. And this also coincided with the British taking over from the Dutch in 1806. And it's from this date that we see a lot more literature about Muslims, particularly in this area. We also see Muslim names popping up amongst the enslaved. So at that time, most of the people, if not all of the people that had worked on these farms here in this part of the peninsula were enslaved people. And I know we believe in our community that most of us come from Southeast Asia, Malaysia, or Indonesia and so on. But the reality, and according to the documents themselves, is that most of the slaves actually came from Madagascar and Mozambique, particularly in this area. And it's because of their origins that we had this very derogatory term in our community for darker Muslims or darker colored people, which is maspika, which comes from the fact that many of those people came from that part of Africa and were brought here to work on the farms. And so we see the coinciding of these, some of them Muslim, some non-Muslim, of African slaves, Southeast Asian slaves in a minority, as well as a number of Indian slaves as well, with many of these political exiles as well. And around this period, building on the work of, I'm not sure how many people know about Mr. Ibrahim Roda, he wrote about Strand, but he formulated that Twanguru in Buka actually sent out deputies as da'is to give da'wah, further into the peninsula and into the colony at the time. And so in Strand there was Imam Abdul Samad, in what was Deep River there was Ahmad van Makassar, the forefather of Imam Yasin Harris. Even in Simonstown people were sent out. But we don't have any written records of who was sent to this area of Claremont and Newlands. And the only evidence that we know that people were here is through, the names of Muslims popping up in that period. And so when we look at some of the census records, we see some very familiar names popping up. We see a name like Slamdin popping up, was the individual that endowed this masjid. We see a name Asia popping up. I'm not sure if the descendants know, but Asia was the father of another individual named Kamaldin. He's the forefather of the Kamaldin family. Another individual named Ontom, the father of someone named Tofi, which is the forefather of the Tofi family. And we can see in the 1820s, many of these different people, popping up as freed slaves among that community. And slowly you start to have, a taste of a community being born. And, we don't have any evidence of a maqbara or a masjid at the time. However, we know the practice of the Muslims at the time was to establish something called a lange. And I know many of the older Buddhas and Tikis over here will remember what a lange is. It's like a little salah khana before an actual masjid was established. And so, I am very sure that there was actually a lange that was established in this area. And, around 20 years later, in the 1840s, by the time when all of the enslaved people were free, we start to see that those very same slaves built themselves up to earn some money, whether it's through perekar or it was through masonry, or they were painters, they were sculptors, they were wood carvers, through their trades, they built themselves up to make some money. And you see that many of these people start to either purchase land or granted land in exchange for some of their trades. And this is particularly when we see a very prominent individual in the records known as Ago van der Kaap or Ajo van der Kaap starting to pop up. And he's granted quite a large proportion of land in the Sanssouci area, which is the school is still there, but this larger area or farm was known as Sanssouci. And this Ajo van der Kaap, later on we find out that his actual name was Ajohar, and he's the forefather of the Ajohar family. And from a very old Mesang tombstone that we found in the Kubus over there, there was one that described him as Sheikh Ajohar. So we don't know much about the leadership and the formation of the Muslim community in that period, but here we see some evidence that Ajohar himself, Ajo van der Kaap, was actually the leader, the imam, the sheikh of this very early budding community of freed slaves that rose out of this area. And around that same period, Slamdin's brother Samai, a very prominent carriage man, he was the horse and cart driver for the famous astronomer Herschel. He was granted property, as well as their third brother Kamis also became quite prominent, and he settled up in Makassar itself, the famous Daris and Kamis family over there. And so it was these three brothers, Asia that I mentioned. There was also an individual named Badruddin, someone named Fakhruddin, and some of the early Muslims that started to take transfer of property in the area. And it's from that time that we also see the establishment of two main features, that highlight community in the area or established community, and that is a masjid and a maqbara. And so in terms of the masjid, the very first masjid that went up in this area was this masjid. In 1849, Slamdin himself had purchased this property. By 1850, it was already being built. 1851, the masjid was built. And only in 1854, 170 years ago, was that trust document drawn up where Imam Rashid referenced that. Imam Abdul Rauf of Bainigras Street Masjid was made the trustee of the masjid. But even before that, in the around 1850, the space was already being used as a masjid at that time. At the same time, the same Slamdin also owned property on that side of what is now the railway, and he endowed what was a maqbara. And so one of the earliest maqbaras is the old Draper Street maqbara, and I'm not sure how many old Claremont residents can remember that there used to be a kubus on that ground over there, which is where many of the older families, the slumdians, even some of the Abdurrahs and older families were buried, as well as a cross next to the Claremont Main Road Masjid, which is still being used today. And those are just two kubuses or maqbaras in the area. There were another 3 in the surrounding area. I'm not sure how many are aware that even on Rondebosch Common, there was a maqbara that was endowed at the same time in 1854. There was a maqbara in Newlands, just off Newlands Avenue, and there were quite a number in this area, which highlight the prominence, specifically of Muslims that they had in the area, and the effect that they had, in this area as a community. And we even see from, municipal documents that, the municipality themselves admitted that it was the Muslim community, as they termed the Malays, that ensured that Newlands, Claremont, even Wynberg was turned into such a cosmopolitan and mercantile area, a lot of different shops, because of this very Muslim community at the time. And from that Ajuhar that I mentioned, one of his daughters married the son of another freed slave from Buka by the name of Harun Barkhia, and that is actually the ancestor, the forefather of Imam Harun himself. So I found it quite fitting that Imam Harun, is the descendant, direct descendant of one of the very first imams of this masjid. And I think after the masjid, was established and the maqbaras were established, most of the history had been written up, recorded in the book, the history of Claremont. And I think from then on, most of us here are familiar with how the history progressed over time. Shukran.
Aslam Fataar is a distinguished professor of sociology of education at Stellenbosch University, prolific author, and most importantly, a long-standing and senior member of the Claremont Main Road Masjid. Imam Shahid and I are grateful for Aslam's support in enriching our imamat roles. He will speak about a tribute to our predecessor, Imam Hassan Solomon's al-Marhum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. When one listens to presentations like this, the one thing, the responsibility that comes up, I'm making a very general point, is to endow some kind of a scholarship to have this thing studied properly. Cost you about R1 million to have this studied properly. And I'm suggesting that that is something that I think about, including myself. I'm going to truncate, petit kort praat, van Imam Hassan Solomon's al-Marhum. And I'm going to start by saying the following things, that we are living in a al-am al-huzn, in a year of trauma, in a year of genocide, global genocide. And I want to reference the year 620, when the Prophet ﷺ experienced am al-huzn. That is the year of sorrow and trauma that he experienced. Why? Because he came under the persecution at its height of the context in which he lived. And his wife, his beloved wife Khadija, to whom he was married for 25 years until her age of 50 when she passed away. Subhanallah, his psycho-affective and emotional context was ripped from under him, because this was the woman who was the first Muslim who assured the Prophet that when he received wahi, that he is the Prophet of Islam. A second thing happened in that year, and that is his benefactor, his lineage benefactor Abu Talib passes away. And when your lineage benefactor passes away in the Jahiliyyah times, you are left unmoored, unprotected, because Abu Talib and the lineage that they belong to could offer the Prophet some protection when the Prophet delivered a message that was really ripping the community's moral or immoral foundations apart and became a threat to them. And then he died. What happened after that? Just very soon after that, Al-Mi'raj and Isra. In the moment of trauma, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confers on Prophet the blessing of the Mi'raj. In other words, the answer to the trauma is the connection via the salah, via our worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the story that we've heard, we can hear how these people in clandestine, the underground, and sometimes on ground establish their commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this community to thrive. That's my first point. My second point, telescope to 1979 and between 1979 and 1985. Imam Hassan Solomons was appointed as the Imam of this masjid. And he went on in 5 or 6 very short years in this masjid to leave us a legacy worthy of exploration and emulation. What was that legacy? Let me give you some markers of that legacy point, and then I'll come back and explain what that all means. Firstly, in 1983, in August 1983, Imam Hassan is a speaker at the launch of the United Democratic Front in Rocklands. There he spoke with people like Alan Bushra to launch the United Democratic Front. And what was the United Democratic Front? At that point it had said that we are confronting the depth and the brutality of apartheid out of the 60s and 70s and 80s. The answer in response is to develop a multi-front, multi-faith, multi-group alliance to fight against the oppressive apartheid regime. And all those leaders who had been participating in that were utterly and absolutely heroic, because they had to not just confront the apartheid state, but they also had to confront their own communities. So at the same time confronting the apartheid state, and at the same time confronting their own communities who had, out of the repression of the 60s and 70s, lapsed into I'm going to use a harsh word, complacency. And some even participating in the quietness in the apartheid struggle. Imam Hassan emerges in that context, and he becomes a fountainhead for a burning spotlight, for articulating, for giving words to the anti-apartheid struggle from an Islamic perspective, from the mimbar of Claremont Main Road Masjid, where I, in 1982, at first listened to him. And I thought to myself, subhanAllah, I am in the student struggle. I have been experimenting with communist and Marxist ideas, and here I was listening to someone speaking into that anti-apartheid realm from an Islamic perspective. كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ. When you listen to this ayah, when Imam spoke it here, rise up and bear witness to justice. When you heard that in that Islamic Quranic language, it hit your heart so very hard that it fueled you going forward. Another event, and there were many, but I'm going to now truncate, is when Imam in 1985, now he is 83, he joins the anti-apartheid struggle as a leader. He established an anti-Islamic Muslim position, and he is now on the run. For his family comes under pressure. He's never really at home. He is hidden in various homes in Hanover Park, in Surrey Estate, and so on and so forth. Why? Because they are now being pursued by the police. And in that very fateful day, Eid al-Adha, 1985, Imam Hassan was intent on, because he was also very adventurous, that's what I was told. He was intent on delivering the Eid al-Adha khutbah from this member. No one was going to deter him from that, because that was where he needed to pronounce on Islam and their commitment to the anti-apartheid struggle in the very depth of the battle against apartheid. So he delivers the khutbah. And then, the story must all be told. I only have heard a bit of the story. He escapes. He escapes apparently out of the window. I don't know which window. Some says the top window. I don't know which window. This window here. There is a decoy that gets set up. The decoy is his brother on a motorbike who goes up that way, and the police chases the brother. He escapes out of the window. Brothers and sisters, what for instance. And then he lands up in a getaway car driven by the wonderful Riyad Najjar, the principal. And they take him away to one of his brother's homes, where he stays for a little while in a pigeon loft. Now, of course, they say that Imam Hassan also cultivated pigeons, or maybe he stayed behind the pigeon loft. And then from there, he is spirited out of the country, and he is driven up to Botswana, and then he moves into Saudi Arabia, and so on. Can we imagine Can we imagine the sheer danger, the sheer adventure in the commitments that you make, when you make it, the consequences that you have to account for when you make those commitments, and the life that you must live, with the consequences for family, with the consequences for community, and the consequences for congregation. That was my second point. I've got 2 more points, Imam. Nou, wat gaat hier aan? Waar komt die imam vandaan, ordinary man? Let's telescope back. You start telling the story of colonialism, of the Khoi period, and so on, of his forefathers. That all plays a role in the practices that establishes him, serendipitously, his family and so on. His family lands up in a particular way, in the way described in Constantia, and they become, in the context of huzn, in the context of trauma, they become, under those limiting conditions, the most beautifully flourishing community of inter-collaboration, of cooperation, of love across the color line in all kinds of ways, and of establishing entrepreneurship on their farm, a flourishing farm, out of which they sell produce, they sell flowers, they sell all related kinds of products from that particular farm. And the Solomon's family then therefore under those conditions thrive. 1967 happens, and 1967 rips all of that, introducing sorrow, trauma into that particular community, but galvanizing the consciousness of Imam Hassan. Imam Hassan would have gone to Constantia Primary School, if you'll allow me another few minutes, then he goes to South Peninsula, then he goes to UCT, he doesn't complete immediately, he goes to UNISA, he goes to Pentec where he learns about textiles and clothing, he goes back at some point again to UCT where he then completes. He then gets exposed to the world of ideas, to the world of the unity movement at SP, for example, and in the politics of Cape Town, which is fundamentally unity movement, to the politics of the PAC, to the politics of the ANC, a little bit, and Imam Harun, obviously, to the influences of the young people who were swirling around him and were his mates. Abu Bakr Fakir being probably the most important intellectual person of that time, whom we also have to, as part of this project, whose life we have to research, and to Ibrahim Bardin, and to Yusuf da Costa, and so on and so forth. So he swam in those waters. He joined Sanzaf. He gets sort of tutored and educated by his brother Sheikh Farid Khalildin to become an imam, when he does become an imam in 1979, for which he is entirely or mostly unprepared. Right? This was a masjid at that stage that 2 safs for Jumu'ah. Right? Imam Rashid becomes the Qari and the Hafiz al-Qur'an who leads the Tarawih Salah after his sojourn in prison and his sort of marginalization from the mainstream Sultan of the community. He ends up here. And Imam Rashid and Imam Hassan become partners in arms. Imam Rashid, the beautiful Qari, and Imam Hassan, the beautiful orator. So that was what I remember most powerful from Imam Hassan. His beautiful oratory, soft-spoken person, but when you give him a microphone or a stage, his voice comes to life and he articulates a vision of the world that was compelling. So what was that vision? Third point. His vision was, my respected brothers and sisters, non-racialism and anti-racism, drawn from the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the example of Bilal and the inspiration of the death of Imam Abdullah Harun. Cooperation and interfaith as the cornerstone of the anti-apartheid struggle that he joined. Not isolation and ideological bigotry and framing that one and that one as the other. No, every single human being. This was also the vision of the UDF and the ANC, multi-party, multi-racial, non-racialism. Everyone is potentially your friend. And isn't that what we currently need in the solidarity struggles against the Zion, the decrepit, the barbaric Zionists? That's solidarity. Solidarity. What did we have here 2 Fridays ago? That Jewish folks were excommunicated from their religion. Was the story from Irtidad. They came here and celebrated their Shabbos. This is the second time that they did it. That directly comes out of the intellectual and into the qalb, the heart process of Imam Hassan Solomon's in the 1980 moment. And we have to honor it. We have to honor it. We call it today by a word, progressive Islam. We call it today by a word, Islamic liberation theology. He didn't have that language for it. But he had a pure and unadulterated descriptive language for motivating people to become part in the struggle for justice against oppression. And so my final point is this. What is the responsibility for us as a Jama'ah and as a community today? I have recently become part of the establishment of the Imam Hassan Solomon's Foundation. And we are asking one question. If Imam Hassan pivoted, why did he pivot to the anti-apartheid struggle in the context in which pivoting was an anachronism? Dis eienaardig geweest. You were sort of cut off from the community. On what basis did he pivot and why? Now, 40 years later, 50 years later, what are the challenges that we have to pivot towards? The Imam Hassan from the Solomon Foundation is answering that question. And it's not going to be an answer because we're going to give lectures, necessarily. But it's an answer to begin to understand what world we currently live in. Having just gone through Al-Amien genocidal year, where the Zionist barbarians have decimated any sense of what they, any sense of the humanity of the Palestinians. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.
Shukran kathiran, Professor Aslam Fataar. I know Aslam has written his entire speech, so we ask him to maybe edit it and publish it some way so that we can read and reflect more about it. I also want to acknowledge that we have Imam Hassan's son, Nasser. Nasser is here. Nasser, we are so grateful for your father. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a high place in Al-Jannah, inshallah. As I stand on the shoulders of your father, because of him, I was given the opportunity to make the khutbah, and he nurtured so many of us. And I'm so glad that I can announce that someone is writing a book about his life, because these are really unsung heroes. So we now come to a very special part of our program, and I'd like to call upon the Secretary of the Claremont Main Road Masjid Board of Governors, Jamia Galant, to speak to us about this very special part of our program. Shukran, Jamia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.
Don't have the same expectations of the two speakers. Mine is a little bit more sedate, but no less important. It is my privilege today to continue a wonderful tradition we started at Claremont Main Road Masjid a few years ago, to pay tribute to people in their lifetime. We should not have to wait for memorial services to acknowledge, to show gratitude to, and to celebrate people who have touched our lives. We should do so in their lifetime, so that they know how they have impacted the lives of those around them, and so that they can again experience the love and appreciation of those around them. So in the spirit of celebrating 170 years of this masjid today, we want to pay tribute to 3 women who are an integral part of this masjid community since the 1970s. Although in recent years they have been less able to be part of our masjid activities, they remain staunch and loyal members of this congregation. However, I realize that many younger congregants may not remember them, and many newer congregants may never have met them. So while I don't have the time to go into all the biographical histories, I do want to share a little bit about them and their contributions to building this masjid community. So our 3 honorees for today are Aunty Jany Saban, who celebrated her 96th birthday on the 14th of September this year. Aunty Fatima Ganief, who celebrated being 95 years old on the 30th of September this year. And my mother, Aunty Mymona Galant, who is 85 years old today. It is fortuitous that all 3 their birthdays are so close to the 170th anniversary dhikr we planned for today. So I will start from the oldest to the youngest. Aunty Jany is a quiet, unassuming woman who always has a gracious smile for everyone around her. Aunty Jany became part of the Claremont Main Road Masjid community when her late husband, Al-Marhoom Saban, became part of the first cohort of Board of Governors at this masjid in the 1970s. Buddha Rashad served officially as the treasurer of the board for many years, but unofficially also served as caretaker cum cleaner. Aunty Jany supported him in all his endeavors, and once recalled fondly how Buddha Rashad took pleasure in house cleaning the mosque every Friday as well as the day before Eid. Aunty Jany's children have frequently testified to how the masjid and all its related activities was the focal point of their lives. They were both committed to ensuring the upliftment and progress of the masjid and its dispersed community after the forced removals in the 1960s. According to her son Abdul Alim and daughter Abida, they inspired their children with a dictum that the mosque is not a museum to be visited occasionally, but it should be the hub of all one's decision making and should be given all the respect it deserves. It is not surprising, therefore, that Aunty Jany still insists on contributing a monthly masjid membership fees even when there is no expectation for her to do so. And Alhamdulillah, over the years, no matter how difficult her mobility became, Aunty Jany would still come to the masjid for Jum'ah, for Eid Salah and other big nights. Alhamdulillah, we are blessed to have her in our presence today. Aunty Fatima Ganief is known for her infectious laugh and caring spirits. Aunty Fatima Ganief and her late husband, Almarhum Buddha Qasim Ganief, were among the young people attracted to the progressive message of Islam articulated by Shaheed Imam Abdullah Harun in the late 50s and early 60s at the Claremont Main Road Masjid. In the late 1970s, they formed part of the core of the congregation established at Claremont Main Road Masjid after the Abdul-Rauf era in 1978. Aunty Fatima was always an active member of the congregation alongside Buddha Qasim, who also served as treasurer and trustee of the masjid. She often recalls many fond memories of the Claremont Main Road Masjid congregation in the 70s and 80s and insists that the time was with her husband serving Claremont Main Road Masjid was the best time of her life. Together, they organized many fundraising and social events for the masjid community, and Aunty Fatima fondly remembers having to make soup and curry and roti for the many fundraising activities of the masjid, especially when they renovated the masjid and built the new atrium. Both Buddha Qasim was also renowned for running the tuck shop at the masjid with the support of Aunty Fatima for many years. The tuck shop used to be where the kitchen is now. Long after Buddha Qasim passed away, Aunty Fatima continued to support all our masjid activities, and for as long as she could, she used to regularly attend Jum'ah services. Aunty Fatima's son, Yusuf, cannot be here today, but he has written a poem dedicated to his mother that he would like us to read, and Iman is coming to read the poem. The poem is from Yusuf Ganief, Aunty Fatima's son.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A tribute to Ma Fatima on her 95th birthday. Today we celebrate you, Ma Fatima. Born into a family of 9, your light has always shone bright. At just 5 years old, you lost your father, but even then your strength carried you forward. By 9, you were more than just a daughter. You became a second mother, raising your siblings with love, allowing your own mother to work and support the family. And at 16, you took on the world, working in a factory for 25 years, building a home with Dad by your side, brick by brick and dream by dream. Though you never had the chance for formal schooling, you became the wisest person I know. Your lessons were not found in books, but in the way you lived your life. with unwavering faith, love, and a heart full of grace. You taught me so much, but more than anything, you showed me how to love, how to trust in God, and how to approach life with positivity. Even in the face of hardship, you stood by me through every trial, always reminding me to believe in myself, supporting me even when my beliefs stretched beyond tradition. Your love, Ma, is unconditional, and it's something I carry with me always. Your devotion to God, your kindness in every soul you meet, it inspires everyone around you. I am proud to call you my mother, and today I celebrate not only your 95 years of life, but the incredible legacy of love and faith that you've built. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, Ma. I love you more than words can say.
And our last tribute is to my mother, Aunty Mymona Galant. Aunty Mymona is known for her love of reading and her love of the Qur'an. She has been a teacher to many in this congregation. My mother also started her Claremont journey at Claremont Main Road Masjid alongside my father, Al-Amien Dhikr Jama'ah, who was also part of the Claremont Muslim Youth Association started by Imam Abdud-Daiyaan. In the mid-60s, when they started a library at Claremont Main Road Masjid, my mother worked in the library cataloguing all the books. Together with my father, they joined the Claremont Main Road Masjid community with other former students of Imam Abdud-Daiyaan in the late 70s. For 20 years, my mother taught at the Vanguard Madrasa, later becoming the principal. During this time, she developed a pioneering phonetic method of teaching Quran reading, which she also introduced in the early 1990s at the Claremont Main Road Masjid Saturday morning madrasa. She shared the teaching methods with the other teachers at the madrasa, and subsequently, her method of teaching Quran reading has been published in a series of 8 Quran readers which are used in all grades at the Saturday morning madrasa. She has also taught Hajj classes and Tukamandi classes to groups of women at home and at the masjid. Some here will also recall that for several years my mother used to regularly perform i'tikaf at the masjid upstairs during the last 10 days of Ramadan, and inspired other women to occasionally join her. In recent years, my mother has not attended masjid activities as regularly, but is an avid reader of all our Claremont Main Road Masjid publications, including our khutbahs and AGM reports. Once again, Alhamdulillah, we are grateful that she is able to be in our presence again today. Today, we honor all 3 of these women. We thank Allah for protecting them and all of us during the trying days of COVID. And we thank them for blessing us with their presence here today. Today we stand on the shoulders of these women and all those who came before us as we strive to uphold and build on the rich legacy of this masjid. We ask Allah to bless Aunty Jany, Aunty Fatima, my mother Aunty Mymona, with good health and strength, inshallah, and reward them and all the deceased stalwarts of this masjid in perpetuity for their services to this masjid, inshallah. And finally, although we have not singled them out for tributes today, it would be remiss of us to not also acknowledge and express our gratitude to 2 younger elders, namely Dr. Yusuf Jawa Abrams and Dr. Surur Solomon, who are also from that generation of students of Imam Harun who joined this congregation in the late 70s and early 80s and are still active members of our congregation, Alhamdulillah. Your presence continues to enrich our community, and we pray Allah grants you good health and strength to be with us for many, many more years, inshallah. Shukran.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I serve on a number of organizations, and I have been involved with the Claremont Main Road Mosque for a number of years as chairman and now also on the board of governors. The mosque committees are voluntary committees. People have their own jobs, and in addition to that, they have to serve the mosque. So it is really a job that people have to put their hearts in. It's almost a 24-hour job. How some people manage, I do not know. But I'm sure Jamia's mother and father, the late father, would be very proud. She does a wonderful work to inform the congregants about the happenings at the mosque, and also do the minutes and all those other things. And now with the situation as it is, with the technology as it is, you have to be up and au fait with all the things. And we're going to say shukran to Jamia for the wonderful work that you do. I'm sure your father will be very proud. Thank you very much for the work that you do, and may you continue to do the work. Yes, you can.
I know that this is again the strength, secretary of our masjid, Jamia Galant, for so long. And I know that Jamia does it in honor of her late father, Al-Marhum Siddiq Galant. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a high place in Jannah. May Allah grant him the ajr and the thawab of her service. As we know in the hadith, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, if you pass away and you leave behind three things, sadaqah jariyah, knowledge, and good children who make dua for you. And he has got all these three things. Right? He's a good teacher, he's left so much of knowledge, and there he's got wonderful children who are continuing his legacy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a high place in Jannah. Lastly, just before the adhan, I want to acknowledge, again, I've spoken a lot about women. People say, what Khatam very Claremont? This is what happens at Claremont. That we empower our women and our masjid then flourishes. Ek sê altyd dat die man sê bly by die huis en sê vir ons kom maar sien toe dat al die problems gesolve is. But one of the most important parts of any masjid committee, as you would know, or any organization, is the funds, isn't it? The amana of the trust of the fund. And we have a wonderful treasurer in the form of Wasila Akhadin that we would like to honor. She has been the treasurer of the Claremont Main Road Masjid for more than a dozen years, 12 years. Right? She's already retired, but she's still giving her, and we can assure you that her trust and her amana is meticulous. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless Wasila for her service. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her good health, inshallah. Wasila, can you come forward? I know Wasila is very shy. She has also organized much of what you see today. The event that you see today, she has organized.
No, Imam, sorry. We are going to give each one a pen. I want to say thank you to Nizam for having made a sticker. These pens were got on Thursday, and he put the speaker on Friday. So that's why we have it here. But please.